Jake Rayner thought he was unstoppable, a small-town mechanic who turned his garage into a criminal empire built on arrogance, stolen cars, and the belief that no rule could ever touch him. But when Detective Marla Greene started following the trail he didn't bother to hide, the man who laughed at the law was about to learn that every empire, no matter how bold, eventually breaks. Jake Rayner never liked being told what to do. Even as a kid, he had that restless spark in his eyes, the kind that made teachers sigh and parents shake their heads. If someone said no, Jake heard it as a challenge. He wasn't the biggest kid in school, but he carried himself like he was, with a smirk that dared anyone to prove him wrong. By the time he hit 16, he was skipping classes and hanging around the local auto yard, watching mechanics work with fascination. Cars made sense to him. They didn't argue, didn't judge, and if something broke, he could fix it. That was how he wanted life to be: fixable, bendable, under his control. After high school, Jake started working full-time at a garage, saving up to open his own place. He was smart, in a reckless sort of way. He knew how to cut corners without getting caught, how to make a repair look official even when it wasn't. When he finally opened Rayner's Auto, business boomed. He had a reputation for fast work and cheaper prices than anyone else. Customers loved it. They didn't ask too many questions about where the parts came from, and Jake didn't offer explanations. He told himself it wasn't really wrong, just business. At first, it was small stuff, using parts from junked cars, forgetting to file some paperwork, paying a few bills late, but little by little, the lines blurred. Jake's old friends from the auto yard started bringing him parts that were a little too new, a little too expensive to be scrap. He knew they were stolen, but he shrugged it off. Everyone did it, he thought. Besides, nobody was getting hurt. When the profits rolled in, it only confirmed what he already believed. The system was too slow, too weak, and he was too smart to get caught in it. Jake's confidence grew into arrogance. He bought a custom truck, wore flashy watches, and liked to tell stories about outsmarting the suits. People in town either admired him or avoided him. Some said he was fearless. Others said he was headed for trouble. Jake didn't care. He had money, influence, and the satisfaction of knowing that no one could stop him. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a businessman, at least in his own eyes. The turning point came one humid summer evening when a sleek black SUV was dropped off at his shop. The owner said it had transmission issues and left it overnight. Jake and his crew went to work, but when they opened the hood, they noticed something odd. The engine was spotless, too clean for a car supposedly having problems. One of the guys spotted a small device tucked under the chassis, a GPS tracker. Jake pried it loose, examined it, and smirked. He figured it was just another paranoid owner or maybe a repo tracker. Without giving it much thought, he tossed it in the trash. That simple act sealed his fate. The SUV wasn't what it seemed, and neither were the people who had brought it in. For the first time, someone was watching Jake Rayner, and this time they wouldn't look away. Detective Marla Greene had spent over a decade in law enforcement, long enough to know that big cases often started with small mistakes. When reports of missing vehicles began piling up across neighboring counties, she noticed a strange pattern. The same model of car, the same method of disappearance, and most importantly, the same trail leading back to a small-town repair shop, Rayner's Auto. On paper, it looked like an ordinary business. Clean record, good customer reviews, a local success story. But to Marla, it didn't add up. The stolen vehicles were showing up again with new plates and clean titles, as if they'd never been touched. Someone was laundering cars, and whoever it was knew the system well. She started quietly. Surveillance came first. A camera across the street, unmarked cars parked nearby, small details logged day after day. The same men came and went, always late at night, hauling parts and crates that were never on any invoice. Marla watched the shop lights flicker long after midnight and saw trucks leaving through the back gate, always covered, always unregistered. She began pulling records, insurance claims, title transfers, sales slips. One name kept showing up on the margins: Jake Rayner. Jake, meanwhile, was thriving. His garage was busier than ever, and his confidence grew by the day. He'd built an empire without realizing it, fueled by stolen parts and fake paperwork. His crew looked up to him, and his customers trusted him. He believed he'd outsmarted the entire system. What he didn't realize was that Marla's team was already deep inside that system, tracing every move he made. Each transaction he thought was invisible left a trail, and each trail led straight back to him. Weeks turned into months. Marla gathered enough evidence to suspect Jake wasn't working alone. There were patterns to coordinated for a single man. Shipping routes matched with theft locations. Title numbers appeared in multiple states. Every piece of the puzzle pointed to a larger network, and Jake sat right in the middle of it. Still, she didn't want to move too fast. She'd seen what happened when cases were rushed, criminals slipped through cracks, evidence went missing, and years of work vanished in an instant. This time, she wanted it airtight. Jake's downfall began with his own greed. A shipment of expensive sports cars went missing from a nearby port, and one of them ended up at Rayner's Auto for a routine repair. The car had been tagged by investigators before it disappeared, equipped with a small tracking chip buried deep in the dashboard. When that signal led to Jake's garage, Marla knew she had her link. But she stayed patient, pretending nothing had changed. The longer Jake believed he was free, the more mistakes he'd make. In the meantime, she kept watching. The late-night cash drops, the coded messages, the shipments to unfamiliar addresses. Every move Jake made tightened the noose. By the time he realized someone might be watching, it was already too late. His reputation as the man who couldn't be caught was about to be tested, and the game he'd been playing was only just beginning. Jake couldn't believe his luck when the call came in. A man from out of town wanted to meet about a special job. The voice on the phone was calm and confident, the kind Jake respected. The man said he represented an international bureau looking for vehicles that could be reworked for overseas shipment. It was exactly the kind of deal Jake had been waiting for. Big money, fast turnaround, no questions. To him, it sounded like the next level. What he didn't know was that the man was part of an undercover operation that had been tracking him for months. The meeting took place in a quiet diner on the edge of the highway. The beer laid out the plan in broad terms. A shipment of luxury cars would be moved through Jake's contacts, cleaned up with new identification numbers, and shipped under fake export documents. Jake nodded along, already thinking about how much he could make. The bear promised a massive payout on completion. Jake agreed without hesitation. It wasn't just greed pushing him this time, it was pride. He wanted to prove he could pull off something bigger than anyone else in the business. Back at the shop, he started working around the clock. The crew noticed the tension in his voice, the constant phone calls, and the unusual shipments arriving at odd hours. He didn't tell them much, just that they were about to make more money than ever before. He brought in specialists to alter VIN numbers, people who knew how to scrub digital records and forge documents that would pass even government checks. Jake thought he was operating in total secrecy, but every call and every file transfer was being monitored. The operation ran smoothly for weeks. Cars were stolen, stripped, rebuilt, and prepped for shipment. Jake oversaw every step, checking paperwork, moving cash, and keeping everyone in line. When the trucks finally left for the port, he stood in the doorway of his garage, watching the taillights fade into the distance with a grin on his face. He believed he'd just made the deal of a lifetime. For the first time, he felt invincible. The next morning, everything fell apart. News stations were buzzing about a federal operation that had seized millions of dollars in stolen vehicles at the port. Video footage showed agents uncovering hidden compartments, fake export crates, and falsified documents. Jake's logo appeared on several invoices and shipping papers. His hands started to shake as he watched the reports. Half his crew went missing overnight. Some fled town, others were already in custody. He tried to call his contacts, but no one answered. Still, Jake refused to believe it was over. He convinced himself he could fix it, just like he always did. He gathered what cash he had left and started deleting files, shredding documents, and making calls to anyone who owed him favors. What he didn't realize was that law enforcement was already surrounding him. His name had been flagged across multiple agencies, and every move he made was being logged in real time. The tough guy who thought the rules didn't apply to him was finally standing at the edge of a cliff, and this time there was no turning back. When the knock came at dawn, Jake thought it was another creditor or a disgruntled customer. He was wrong. Agents moved with quiet precision. Windows were flashed, doors were forced, and within minutes officers were inside Rayner's auto. His office, once a shrine to success, became an inventory room for evidence. Boxes were cataloged, ledgers photographed, and devices seized. The shop smelled like oil and paper. At first, Jake tried what had worked before. He negotiated, pleaded, and tried to charm anyone who would listen. He counted favors and old loyalties as courtesy. Those options vanished. People who once laughed at his swagger lowered their heads or walked away. The crew fractured, some fled town, others were quietly arrested. The small network that had buffered him dissolved, and he felt the gap of isolation widening. Charges accumulated in court filings: theft, fraud, interstate transport of stolen goods, conspiracy. Each charge was another link in a chain built from evidence gathered in months of surveillance. Jail was a new kind of solitude. The cell was plain and compact, offering no space for boasting. Time stretched, indifferent, and Jake had no audience to perform for. The bravado that had carved his path began to look thin under the harsh light of waiting rooms and paperwork. Pretrial hearings exposed how many people his business affected. Former partners provided documents and statements that erased protective narratives Jake had told himself. Scraps of emails, hurried messages, and receipts tied him to operations he had assumed were compartmentalized. His lawyers advised caution, emphasizing how prosecutors had methodically connected seemingly separate events. The evidence did not rely on rumor, it relied on records, transaction trails, and corroborated witness accounts that left little room for speculation. The trial itself was public and precise. Prosecutors displayed the pattern, how vehicles were obtained, altered, and exported with forged paperwork. Exhibits and testimony transformed abstract accusations into concrete acts. The defense urged nuance, pointing 2 years of honest work mixed with poor choices. The jury listened to facts, not to the persona Jake had cultivated in bars and garages. When verdicts came, they reflected the record more than the myths he had spun. Sentencing marked the end of the public phase of his life. The term imposed wiped away many plans Jake once held dear. Family dynamics shifted, absent afternoons and missed milestones became the norm. Friends who had cheered his risk-taking were forced to reconcile memory with consequence. Inside the facility, external trappings held no meaning. The custom truck, the watches, the loud claims of invincibility, none of them mattered beyond a photograph. Confinement sharpened routines and softened delusions. Without the noise of reputation, questions he had deflected for years returned. There was time to consider patterns of choice and the rationalizations that justified stealing. The empire he had constructed lost color, reduced to documents and court transcripts. In a smaller way than the headlines had promised, the man who believed laws were suggestions discovered, through absence and consequence, that rules can become ruthlessly real. He had only himself to blame. Years passed quietly inside the concrete walls that now defined Jake Rayner's world. The rhythm of prison life was unchanging: count times, work assignments, and the dull echo of heavy doors closing. The early days were the hardest. He tried to carry himself the same way he had outside, walking with his chest out and chin high, but that kind of confidence didn't earn respect behind bars. Inmates saw through it. The stories about how untouchable he used to be didn't impress anyone. They'd all been someone once. In time, Jake learned to talk less and listen more. He worked in the maintenance shop, fixing small engines and power tools. The pay was almost nothing, but the routine gave him something to hold on to. He liked the quiet focus of mechanical work. Machines didn't lie, and when something broke, there was a clear reason. People weren't like that. They changed their stories, forgot loyalties, and left when things went bad. In the evenings, Jake sat on his bunk reading whatever magazines he could find, flipping through pictures of cars and tools, reminders of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Letters from the outside came less and less. His parents were gone, his sister had stopped writing, and the few friends who promised to stay in touch had long moved on. Now and then, a former customer or employee would send a short note, nothing sentimental, just a few lines about life back home. Those letters stung more than silence. They reminded him how small his empire really was. The garage had new owners, the sign with his name had been replaced, and his story had already faded into a local cautionary tale. Despite the years, Jake never fully admitted guilt. He told himself he had just been unlucky, that the system had made an example out of him. Still, something in him had changed. The anger that once fueled his defiance dulled into resignation. He noticed how easily he accepted rules, now lining up for meals, following orders, checking schedules. The man who once believed laws didn't apply to him now followed everyone without question. Maybe it wasn't respect, but it was survival. One winter afternoon, Detective Marla Greene came to see him. It had been almost 10 years since his conviction. She was older, calmer, still carrying that steady look that had unnerved him during the trial. Their meeting was brief, more for paperwork than conversation, but for a moment Jake saw himself reflected in her eyes, not as the legend he used to imagine, but as an aging man sitting in a gray jumpsuit. When she left, he didn't feel anger. He felt something quieter, something close to understanding. The years blended together after that. Jake kept working, kept to himself, and stopped expecting anything to change. Outside, the world moved on, forgetting the man who once thought he was too clever to be caught. Inside, he found a strange peace in the predictability of his days. The story of Jake Rayner ended not with drama or revenge, but with silence, the kind that comes when a man finally runs out of excuses and is left alone with the truth.